Apache woman had no shelter for her cattle in the rain until a rancher said, "Come with me." The rain had been falling for hours, a steady, cold downpour that turned the dirt paths of the reservation into sticky mud. Maria stood at the edge of her small cattle pen, her boots sinking slightly with each step. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to keep the rain from soaking her clothes. Her hair, dark and streaked with gray, clung to her face, and her hands, rough from years of work, trembled slightly as she scanned the muddy pens. Her herd was small but precious, mostly young calves with a few older cows that had survived years of harsh seasons. Each animal was a living memory, a reminder of her late husband who had taught her everything she knew about raising cattle. Since his passing, Maria had been alone in this work, and though she had learned to manage, some days felt impossible. This day, with the sky gray and the rain relentless, was one of those impossible days. She ran her fingers along the top of the wooden fence, testing its stability. Water pooled around the posts, and some of the mud had washed away entirely, leaving deep holes. She had tried to patch the pens with old tarps, scraps of wood, and whatever she could find around the property, but the rain had been too strong. One of the calves shivered under the thin cover she had stretched over it, its little hooves sinking into the wet ground. Maria's heart tightened. She could not lose any of them. Not now. Not when they were all she had left from the life she and her husband had built together. The thought of a calf succumbing to the cold, of her cows struggling through the storm with nowhere to shelter, made her chest ache. She shook her head and muttered to herself, "Come on, girls. Hang on a little longer. I won't let anything happen to you." She moved from pen to pen, checking on each animal. Some huddled together, seeking warmth from one another. Others wandered restlessly, frightened by the pounding rain and the low rumble of distant thunder. Maria's eyes scanned the sky, searching for any sign that the storm might pass, but it was only heavier now. Her mind raced with solutions, but every idea seemed too small, too weak, too useless against the power of nature. The sun had long disappeared behind the clouds, leaving everything in a dim, gray light. Maria could feel the cold seeping into her bones. She bent to check on a calf that had slipped in the mud, brushing off the thick, wet dirt with trembling hands. Its little eyes looked at her, and she felt a wave of protectiveness wash over her. "I've got you," she whispered, more to reassure herself than the animal. "I won't let anything happen." She looked around again, desperate for options. Her property was small, and the pens were all she had built over the years. There was no barn, no shelter sturdy enough to hold all her cattle. Her old shed, which had been used for feed and tools, was too weak and would collapse under the weight of the storm. She sighed and stepped back, her boots squelching in the mud, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle heavily on her shoulders. Maria had always been strong, used to facing hard work and harsh conditions. She had grown up helping her parents with the land, learned to ride horses and care for animals before she even knew what fear really was. But even she had limits, and today the limits were pressing hard against her. She could not do this alone. She had never asked for help, and she rarely allowed herself to consider it. Pride and habit kept her going, but now they seemed like weaknesses rather than strengths. She paused for a moment, leaning against the fence, and closed her eyes. The rain pounded on her coat, soaked through her layers, and mixed with the sweat of anxiety and effort. She felt a hot tear slip down her cheek, surprising her. She had cried before, of course, quietly when no one was around. But today the tears were mixed with fear and frustration. She loved her animals, and the thought of them suffering was unbearable. Maria tried to think of someone who could help, but the isolation of her home made the thought daunting. The nearest neighbor lived miles away and the roads were slick and treacherous. Even if she could reach someone, would they have the space, the tools, or the willingness to help? She shook her head. No, she would have to do this herself, as she always had. She returned to the pens, moving from animal to animal, trying to offer comfort in the only way she could. She brushed their wet coats with her hands, whispered soft words, and occasionally fed them what little hay remained dry. The calves pressed against her, trusting her in a way that no human could match. She smiled faintly through her worry, feeling a small spark of warmth in her chest. They depended on her, and she would not let them down. Hours passed. The rain did not ease. The sky remained heavy and gray, and the wind picked up, whipping through the trees and rattling the fence posts. Maria's coat was soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. Her muscles ached from bending, lifting, and running through the mud. Yet she continued, refusing to surrender to the storm or the hopelessness that threatened to overwhelm her. At one point, she looked up and realized she could hear the distant sound of a truck engine. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be someone coming to help? Ah! She squinted through the sheets of rain, hoping against hope. The sound grew closer, and soon a figure appeared through the gray curtain of water. A man in a wide-brimmed hat and a heavy coat was driving slowly toward her property. Maria hesitated. Pride, caution, and a lifetime of independence made her want to turn away, to wave him off, and continue struggling alone. But something in the man's calm, steady pace suggested he meant no harm. And the truth was undeniable. She needed help. She could not manage this alone. The thought made her stomach twist, but she nodded faintly to herself. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. She watched as the truck stopped a few feet away. The man stepped out, boots sinking slightly in the mud, and called out over the rain, "Are you okay? Need some help with these animals?" Maria's first instinct was to shake her head, to say no, but she didn't. Instead, she looked at the anxious, wet faces of her calves, at the small, huddled cows, and felt her resolve shift. Ah! She swallowed hard and whispered, almost to herself, "Yes, I could use some help." The man nodded, not judging, not pressing, just offering steady eyes and a quiet presence. Maria felt a strange relief wash over her. For the first time in hours, she felt hope. Fragile, but real. Maybe, just maybe, the storm didn't have to end in disaster. Maybe she didn't have to face it entirely alone. The rain continued, relentless. But Maria's focus narrowed. The storm was still raging, yes, but she had someone willing to stand beside her. And for the first time that day, she felt that the impossible might just be manageable. She bent down once more to check on a small calf, feeling its wet body press against her, and whispered, "Hang on, we'll get through this." Together. Maria watched as the man stepped closer, his boots sinking into the thick mud. He carried no tools, no ropes, nothing but a calm presence that somehow felt steady and reassuring against the chaos of the storm. His coat was soaked through, but he seemed unbothered, moving toward the pens with careful steps. Maria's heart raced. She had never relied on anyone like this before. She had spent her life learning to manage on her own, and yet, here was someone offering help, without question or expectation. The man spoke again, his voice calm, almost soft over the sound of the rain. "You're trying to keep them dry, but the pens won't hold much longer. If we don't move them, some might get hurt." Maria's mouth opened to reply, but no words came. Pride tugged at her, telling her to say she was fine, that she could manage. But then she glanced at her shivering calves. at the older cows huddled in the corner, their wet coats glistening in the gray light. The truth was undeniable. She could not do this alone. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice small. I don't have a barn. The pens, they're falling apart. The man nodded as if he understood entirely. That's okay. We can fix this. You don't have to do it alone. He paused, looking at the herd. I have a barn not far from here, big enough to keep them all safe. Come with me, and we'll get them out of this rain. Maria's eyes widened. A barn? She asked, a mix of hope and suspicion in her voice. She had never had access to a real barn before. Her entire life she had worked with what little she had, making do with scraps in her own hands. The thought of a dry, sturdy shelter seemed almost impossible. Yes, he said. Just follow me. I'll guide them and you help. We'll be careful. No one will get hurt. She hesitated. Pride, fear, and habit warred within her. Could she trust a stranger like this? But as she looked at her calves trembling in the mud, at her cows slipping and struggling, she realized she had no choice. She swallowed hard, nodded, and whispered, "Okay, let's go." The man smiled faintly, a quiet reassurance, and turned toward the path leading away from her property. He gestured for Maria to follow, and together they began moving the herd. It was slow work. The mud clung to their boots, and the animals were scared, some refusing to move. Maria had to coax them, speaking in low, gentle tones, her hands reaching out to guide calves that wobbled on their legs. The man walked steadily beside her, guiding the older cows, his calm presence helping to keep the herd from panicking. Maria noticed small details she hadn't before. The way he stayed just behind the herd to block their retreat into danger, the way he used his voice to direct without shouting, and the patience he showed even when a calf refused to move. She realized that experience and kindness were both at work here, and it made her trust him a little more. As they walked, the rain beat down harder, running off the brim of the man's hat in streams. Ah! The wind picked up, whipping the rain sideways. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, and one of the calves froze, trembling violently. Maria bent down, whispering softly, "It's okay. We're right here. You're safe." The man nodded toward her. "Talk to them. Keep them calm. Your voice matters more than anything right now." Maria was surprised at how true that was. She had always believed that physical strength and hard work were enough to manage cattle, but now she saw that calmness, patience, and voice were just as important. She focused on the animals, speaking in soft tones, reaching out to brush their wet coats and guiding them forward. Slowly, they moved, step by step toward safety. Halfway along the muddy trail, disaster struck. One of the younger calves, a small, nervous animal with bright eyes, slipped in the mud and fell into a shallow ravine. Its legs were tangled, and it let out a frightened bleat. Maria's heart leaped. Without thinking, she ran to it, slipping in the mud herself, her hands grabbing the struggling animal. "Hold on!" she cried. The man was at her side instantly, reaching down to help. Together they managed to lift the calf, supporting it until it regained its footing. Maria felt her arms tremble with relief and exhaustion. The calf was safe, thanks to the unexpected help of this man who had appeared at just the right moment. "See?" he said quietly. "We'll get through this." His calm voice seemed to steady not only the animals but Maria herself. She realized that the journey was not just about moving cattle through mud and rain. It was about learning to trust someone, about realizing that help could come without judgment or expectation. The rest of the journey was slow but steady. Maria began to notice details she hadn't before. The sound of water rushing through small streams along the path, the smell of wet earth, the way the wind rustled the leaves of distant trees. The storm was fierce, but in the midst of it there was a strange beauty, a reminder of life continuing, even in hard conditions. By the time they reached the rancher's property, Maria's coat was soaked, her hair plastered to her face, and her hands raw from the cold and wet. But she felt a strange sense of hope, a relief she hadn't felt in hours. The barn loomed ahead, large, sturdy, and completely dry. The doors opened wide as the man gestured for the cattle to enter, and Maria could hardly believe her eyes. She guided the first few animals inside, their hooves clicking against the wooden floor. The warmth of the barn hit her immediately, a contrast to the cold rain outside. The calves seemed to sense safety as well, their little bodies relaxing as they found dry spots to rest. Maria ran her hands along their coats, brushing off wet mud, whispering reassurances. The man stood nearby, watching with calm patience. "Take your time," he said. "Make sure they're all settled." Maria nodded, feeling gratitude swell in her chest. She realized that this stranger, this man who had appeared from nowhere, had given her more than just shelter for her herd. He had given her hope, a reminder that even in the hardest times, people could help without expecting anything in return. Once the animals were all inside, Maria turned to the man. "Thank you," she said softly. I didn't know what else to do." He shook his head. "You did what you could." "Ah, you're a good caretaker." But even the strongest people need help sometimes. Maria looked around the barn, taking in the dry hay, the solid walls, and the safe space. It felt almost like a miracle after the chaos of the storm. She realized that she had been so focused on surviving on her own that she had forgotten the power of trust, of accepting help when it mattered most. The rain continued outside, relentless, but inside the barn there was warmth, safety, and calm. Maria knelt beside the calves, brushing their coats and whispering soft words. Feeling their small bodies press against hers, she realized that she had not just saved her herd. She had also learned a lesson she would not forget. Life was hard, yes, but it was made a little easier when people were willing to stand together, even strangers. As the storm raged on, Maria and the man worked side by side, moving hay, checking the animals, and talking quietly. She learned his name, John, and shared a little about herself, about her life on the reservation, about her husband, and the lessons she had learned raising cattle alone. John listened without judgment, nodding, asking gentle questions. There was a calm understanding between them, a shared knowledge that hard work and care were what mattered most. By the time the rain slowed to a drizzle, Maria felt a quiet sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The storm had been terrifying, the mud and water relentless, but it had brought her something she hadn't realized she needed: connection, trust, and the understanding that even the strongest people sometimes needed someone to walk beside them. For the first time in a long while, Maria allowed herself to relax. She sat on a bale of hay, watching her herd settle down in the barn, safe and warm. John worked quietly nearby, checking the stalls and the hay, his calm presence a quiet reassurance. Maria knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now she could rest, knowing that her animals were safe and that she had discovered something important about life and trust. The storm had finally slowed to a gentle drizzle, but the ground outside was still soaked and slippery. Inside the barn, the air was warm, filled with the earthy smell of hay and the soft sounds of calves shifting and cows settling. Maria walked slowly between the pens, her hands brushing against the animals' wet coats, checking that each one was comfortable and secure. She had done this countless times before, but never in such circumstances, never with someone else quietly helping beside her. John moved calmly around the barn, stacking hay bales, checking the wooden beams, and making sure the water had not seeped through any cracks. Maria watched him for a moment, noticing the way he worked with quiet efficiency. There was no rush, no tension in his movements, only steady care. It was a stark contrast to her usual frantic efforts when trying to protect her herd in bad weather. Seeing him work, she realized how much more could be accomplished when someone helped with experience and patience. "You've done this before," she said quietly, almost more to herself than to him. John looked up and smiled faintly. "Yes, many times. Storms come and go. Everything you learn to be ready, and sometimes you learn to be patient." Maria nodded. Patience was something she had learned from her elders, but it was often hard to practice in moments like these. The fear of losing her animals had made her frantic earlier, but now, watching John's steady movements, she began to understand the power of calm persistence. As she walked, she noticed one of the older cows looking uneasy. Maria approached slowly, speaking softly, and ran her hand along its wet side. The cow relaxed, leaning into her touch, and Maria felt a sense of pride and relief. This herd was more than just animals to her. They were companions, reminders of her husband, symbols of the life she had built on her own. Protecting them had always been her responsibility, and now, with John's help, she felt the weight of that responsibility shift from an impossible burden to something manageable. Once the immediate needs of the herd were met, John suggested they take a break. He led Maria to a small corner of the barn where a wooden bench was stacked with dry blankets. The smell of warm hay mixed with the cool, wet air of the barn, creating a strange sense of comfort. Maria sat down, her legs sore from hours of standing and walking in the mud, and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "You've been through a lot today," John said gently, handing her a cup of warm tea he had brought in a thermos. "It's okay to rest for a moment." Maria took the cup, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. She looked around the barn, at her herd safe and dry, and a quiet gratitude filled her chest. I didn't think anyone would come," she admitted. "I've been on my own for so long. I wasn't sure what to do." John nodded. "Sometimes we all need someone to walk with us. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." The words lingered in Maria's mind. She had always believed that asking for help was a sign of weakness. Her pride, her independence, her sense of duty, all of it had made her resist reaching out to anyone, even in the hardest moments. But now, sitting here with her herd safe, she felt a quiet shift inside herself. Perhaps strength was not just in doing everything alone, but in knowing when to accept help. After a few minutes, she looked back toward the pens. One of the calves had wandered close to the corner, eyes wide and cautious. Maria rose and moved toward it, speaking softly. "It's okay. You're safe now," she whispered. The calf nudged her hand, seeking comfort, and she laughed quietly, a sound of relief and joy. John watched her, a small smile on his face. "They know you care," he said. "That's why they trust you." The rain outside had lessened to a soft drizzle, but the barn was still a safe haven. Maria and John spent the next hour reinforcing the pens, stacking more hay, and making sure there were dry spots for every animal. Maria noticed how much easier the work felt with two people. Tasks that would have taken her hours alone were accomplished quickly, without panic or mistakes. She realized that this help did not take away her role. It enhanced it, made her care more effective. As they worked, John asked about her life, gently, without pressing. Maria hesitated at first, unsure how much to share with a stranger. But gradually, words began to flow. She told him about her husband, about the lessons he had taught her about cattle and life, about the long hours she had spent managing the herd alone. She shared stories of her childhood on the reservation, learning from her parents and grandparents, and the pride she felt in carrying on their traditions. John listened attentively, nodding and occasionally asking questions. He did not interrupt or judge. He simply offered a patient presence, allowing Maria to speak freely. She found herself opening up in ways she had not expected, feeling a quiet trust developing between them. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel entirely alone. Once the pens were secure and the animals settled, John suggested checking each calf more closely, just to ensure none had been hurt during the storm. Maria agreed, and together they moved carefully among the animals, inspecting hooves, brushing coats, and offering quiet reassurances. One calf had a small scrape on its leg from slipping in the mud earlier, but otherwise the herd was healthy and calm. Maria felt a deep relief wash over her. "See," John said quietly, "they're fine. You took care of them well, and now they're safe." Maria smiled faintly, feeling a mixture of pride and gratitude. She had faced countless challenges raising this herd, but today had shown her the value of patience, trust, and community. She realized that no matter how strong a person might be, some things were easier when shared. The storm outside had passed entirely by this point, leaving only the gentle sound of dripping water from the barn roof. Maria and John sat quietly on a bale of hay, watching the herd settle and the soft light filtering through the barn walls. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of earlier. Maria felt a sense of calm she had not known in years. "Tomorrow," John said gently, "we can think about building something more permanent for them. A proper shelter, stronger pens. You shouldn't have to worry about this every time it rains." Maria nodded, a feeling of hope growing in her chest. She had spent so many years simply surviving, making do with what little she had. But now, with help and guidance, she could start thinking about improving life for her herd, for herself, and for the future. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to relax completely. She leaned back against the hay, listening to the quiet sounds of her animals and the soft drip of water from the roof. The barn was warm, the herd was safe, and for the first time in hours she felt at peace. John continued working quietly, stacking hay and checking the structure of the barn. Maria watched him for a moment, noticing the care he took in every movement. She realized that he had not just brought shelter, he had brought guidance, patience, and a reminder that even the strongest people needed support. As the afternoon turned into evening, Maria felt a deep gratitude that went beyond words. She had faced storms before, both in life and in the weather, but today had been different. She had been reminded that there were people willing to help, people who could make a difficult situation manageable, and she had learned that asking for help did not diminish her strength, it enhanced it. By the time the sun began to set behind the clouds, casting a warm, golden light into the barn, Maria felt a quiet determination. She would not forget this day or the lessons it had taught her. She would take care of her herd, yes, but she would also remember the power of patience, trust, and human kindness. Sitting on the hay, sipping the last of her warm tea, she watched her calves nuzzle each other, their small bodies finally relaxed. She felt a quiet smile spread across her face. The storm had been fierce, the journey difficult, but they had made it through together. And for the first time in a long while, Maria felt that the future, though uncertain, was full of possibilities. The next morning, Maria woke before the sun had fully risen. The barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of the calves shifting and the occasional low murmur of a cow. The storm from the previous day had left the air crisp and fresh, with the smell of wet earth and hay mixing in a way that was strangely comforting. Maria stretched her stiff muscles and took a deep breath. Today, she thought, they could begin to really settle. She moved through the barn, checking each animal carefully. The calves were already awake, eyes bright, ears twitching at the new sounds of morning. Maria smiled faintly. They were safe. They were dry. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a quiet confidence that they would remain that way. John had been up even earlier, moving quietly around the barn, checking the structure, stacking hay, and making sure everything was secure. When he saw Maria enter, he gave her a small nod. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Sleep well?" Maria nodded, feeling a small warmth spread through her chest. "I did," she admitted. "For the first time in days, I slept without worrying about them." She gestured to the calves, who were now eating quietly from the hay she had arranged. "That's good," John said. "They need you calm, just as much as they need food and shelter. Animals can feel fear, and they respond to it. You've done a great job so far, Maria." The praise caught her by surprise. She had always been self-reliant, used to doing everything alone, and rarely allowed herself to accept acknowledgement. Hearing someone recognize her efforts without judgment or expectation made her heart swell in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. I didn't know what I was doing at first. I've always done it alone." "Ah," John nodded. "And now you're learning that alone doesn't always mean better. Sometimes help makes things stronger, not weaker." They spent the morning moving through the barn, reinforcing the pens, and making small adjustments. John showed Maria simple ways to secure the wooden walls and prevent water from seeping in during future storms. He demonstrated how to stack hay for both warmth and stability, explaining why each step mattered. Maria watched carefully, taking mental notes, her hands moving as he instructed. She realized that this was more than just physical labor. It was education, opening his eyes. She had spent years raising her herd, learning through trial and error, but now she was seeing methods that were efficient, safe, and effective. Her respect for John grew as she watched him work. His knowledge was practical, grounded, and shared without any hint of arrogance. As the morning progressed, the animals began to settle more comfortably. The older cows found dry spots to lie down, while the calves explored the corners of the barn with curiosity, testing the boundaries of their new shelter. Maria knelt beside one small calf, brushing its soft coat with her hands and whispering quietly. It leaned into her touch, trusting her completely, and she felt a warmth in her heart that she hadn't felt in months. "Look at them," John said quietly, leaning against the doorway. "They're comfortable. They're safe. And that's because of you." Maria smiled faintly. I just needed a little help," she admitted. The words felt strange, almost foreign on her tongue, but also liberating. Accepting help had never come easily to her, but now she understood that it did not take away her strength. On the contrary, it made her efforts more effective. By midday, the sun had begun to peek through the clouds, casting soft golden light across the barn floor. Maria and John worked together to organize the remaining hay, sweep out small puddles, and ensure every animal had a comfortable spot. The barn, which had felt almost chaotic the day before, now seemed calm, orderly, and alive with quiet energy. At one point, Maria stepped back and looked around. Her herd, safe and settled, the warm light filtering through the walls and John moving quietly nearby, created a scene that was almost peaceful. She had spent so many days struggling alone, but this moment reminded her that life could be steady, kind, and manageable, even after hardship. John noticed her pause and walked over. "You're thinking about the future," he said gently, "about how you'll care for them when you're on your own again." Maria nodded. "Yes, I've been surviving for so long. I haven't really thought about thriving. Maybe now I can." John smiled faintly. "You can, and I'll help however I can. But the rest will be your work, your care, your decisions. You've done the hardest part already, protecting them through the storm." The two of them worked through the afternoon, repairing minor damages from the storm, moving supplies, and sharing quiet conversation. Maria began to feel a connection she had not expected. John's presence was steady, calm, and encouraging. He never rushed, never criticized, and his guidance was practical and kind. She found herself opening up more, talking about her childhood, her life on the reservation, and her hopes for the future. "You've done a lot on your own," John said at one point, looking at her with quiet admiration. "You should be proud of that." Maria looked down, her fingers brushing hay from a bale. "I am, but I've also learned that it's okay to accept help. I didn't realize how much I needed it until today." John nodded. Strength isn't always about doing everything alone. Sometimes strength is knowing when to stand with someone. As the day wore on, Maria began to think more about her future. The storm had been a test, a harsh reminder of vulnerability, but it had also shown her a path forward. She could rebuild her property, create proper shelters for her herd, and do it without carrying the entire burden alone. She felt a spark of hope, a quiet determination to improve her life and the life of her animals. By late afternoon, they had finished the work that needed immediate attention. The barn was secure, the hay stacked, and every animal comfortable. Maria walked slowly through the pens, her hands brushing the soft coats of the cows and calves. She felt a sense of relief and satisfaction she had not known in months. John leaned against the doorway, watching her quietly. "You've done very well," he said. "Your herd is safe, and you've learned some new ways to care for them." "That's a good day's work." Maria smiled faintly, a mixture of exhaustion and contentment. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." John shook his head. "You would have managed. But I'm glad I could help. That's what neighbors are for, even if we don't always know we need it." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the barn, Maria realized how much had changed in just 24 hours. The storm had been terrifying, but it had brought her help, guidance, and a renewed sense of hope. She understood now that life did not have to be a lonely struggle. There were people willing to stand beside her, willing to share their knowledge and care. And in that shared effort, she found a strength she had not known she possessed. By evening, Maria sat quietly on a bale of hay, watching her herd settle in the warm barn. The calves had curled into small piles, the older cows resting calmly. The soft smell of hay and the gentle sound of the animals' breathing created a peaceful rhythm. She sipped the last of the warm tea John had brought her, feeling the warmth spread through her tired body. The barn was no longer just a shelter. It was a symbol of safety, of trust, and of new possibilities. Maria understood that the challenges of life were still ahead, but now she had learned a lesson that would carry her forward. Strength was not only in enduring alone, but in recognizing when to accept help and work together. As the light faded outside, she stood and looked at John. "Tomorrow, I want to learn more," she said quietly. "About building proper pens, caring for them in storms, everything." John nodded, a small smile on his face. "We'll do it, step by step. You'll be ready for anything." Maria looked around the barn one last time before the night fully set in. The herd was safe, the barn was secure, and she felt a quiet sense of pride and hope. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew she would not face them alone. The storm had ended, but the lessons it brought of trust, patience, and shared effort would stay with her forever. Absolutely. Here's part 5, fully expanded to approximately 1,300 words, concluding the story in simple, engaging English with a satisfying, realistic, and uplifting resolution. The next morning, Maria woke early, the barn quiet except for the soft shuffling of her herd. The storm had passed completely, leaving the air crisp and fresh, with sunlight spilling through the gaps in the wooden walls. She stretched her tired muscles and took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the morning and the calm after the chaos of the previous day. Today, she thought, it was time to return home, to put into practice everything she had learned and to ensure her herd's safety for the future. John was already awake, moving quietly among the pens, checking on the animals and stacking a few remaining hay bales. When he saw Maria, he gave her a small nod. "Morning," he said calmly. "Ready to head back?" Maria nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Leaving the safety of John's barn and returning to her own property felt daunting. Her pens were still vulnerable, her land muddy and uneven, and the memory of the storm made her anxious. Yet she also felt a newfound confidence, a knowledge that she now had tools, guidance, and experience to face what lay ahead. Together, they began the slow process of moving the herd back to her property. The calves, now more confident and less frightened than the day before, followed her closely. Maria spoke softly to each one, guiding them through the mud and puddles, her voice steady and calm. John walked beside her, helping to direct the older cows, preventing them from straying or slipping in the slick terrain. As they moved, Maria reflected on the lessons she had learned. The storm had been a harsh reminder of vulnerability, but it had also shown her the value of patience, trust, and shared effort. She had always believed that doing everything alone was a sign of strength, but now she understood that strength also came from knowing when to accept help. The herd, safe and calm, was proof of that lesson. Halfway along the path, one of the younger calves paused, eyes wide and ears flicking nervously. Maria knelt beside it, speaking softly. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're almost home. You're safe." The calf nudged her hand, and she felt a quiet smile spread across her face. This was no longer just about survival. It was about care, trust, and connection. John noticed her pause and spoke quietly. "You've come a long way in just a short time. Look at them. They trust you. You've done all of this." Maria nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I never thought I could manage this alone," she admitted. "But I've learned I don't always have to." By late morning, they reached her property. The ground was still soft from the rain, and small streams of water ran along the paths. But the barn she had built in her mind, reinforced with John's guidance, felt possible now. They guided the herd into her pens, checking carefully that each animal had a dry spot and that the makeshift shelters held firm. It was not perfect, but it was a start. Maria had learned how to build stronger pens, how to stack hay effectively, and how to keep her animals calm during stressful situations. Once the herd was settled, Maria stepped back and looked at her land. Muddy, uneven, and vulnerable as it was, she felt a sense of pride. This was her life, her responsibility, and now it was also her creation. The storm had tested her, but she had survived, adapted, and grown. She knew that the next challenge would come, but she also knew that she had the knowledge and resilience to face it. John walked beside her, quietly observing. "You've done well," he said. "Your herd is safe, and you've learned some new ways to care for them. The next step is making this permanent, so the storms don't scare you again." Maria nodded. "I want to do that," she said firmly. "I want to build proper shelters, improve the pens, and make sure they're safe no matter what." John smiled. "And you can. You've learned what matters most: patience, care, and planning. Now it's time to put it into action." Over the next few days, Maria worked tirelessly. She reinforced the pens using the techniques John had taught her, stacking hay for warmth and using sturdy wood to prevent flooding. She repaired weak spots in the fencing and dug small trenches to divert rainwater away from the pens. It was hard work, exhausting both physically and mentally, but Maria felt a quiet satisfaction with each task completed. The herd responded to the changes with calm and curiosity. The calves explored their improved pens with cautious excitement, testing the new spaces and finding comfort in the dry hay. The older cows settled more easily, confident in the security of their surroundings. Maria moved among them, speaking softly, checking each animal, and feeling a deep sense of connection. Her work was not just labor. It was care, responsibility, and love made tangible. During these days, John visited occasionally, offering advice and guidance without taking over. He showed her small improvements that would make the pens safer and more comfortable. Maria appreciated his presence, but also recognized that she was no longer reliant on him. She had learned the skills, and now she was capable of managing on her own. The sense of independence, strengthened by the lessons of trust and cooperation, filled her with quiet pride. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Maria sat on a hay bale and watched her herd graze in the improved pens. The calves nuzzled each other, the cows rested peacefully, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and hay. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that she had protected them, learned from the experience, and created something lasting. John approached quietly, standing a few feet away. "You've done well," he said softly. "They're safe, happy, and healthy, and you've done it all yourself." Maria looked at him and smiled. "I didn't do it all alone," she said. "You helped me when I needed it. But now I can continue on my own. I know what to do." John nodded, his expression calm and approving. "That's the best part. You've learned, adapted, and grown. The herd is safe, and you're ready for whatever comes next." Maria felt a wave of gratitude and relief. The storm, the mud, the fear, all of it had brought her to this point. She had faced hardship, accepted help, learned new skills, and strengthened her connection to her animals. Most importantly, she had learned that asking for help did not make her weak, it made her stronger. As the evening settled, Maria walked among her herd, speaking softly, brushing the calves' coats and checking the pens. One last time. The animals were calm, their trust in her evident. She realized that this moment was more than just survival. It was growth, resilience, and hope for the future. The sun set fully, casting long shadows across her property. Maria stood at the edge of the pens, looking out over her land. Muddy, imperfect, but hers. Her herd was safe, her home was more secure, and she felt a quiet confidence that she could face whatever challenges might come. She had survived the storm, yes, but she had also learned, adapted, and grown stronger. As night fell, Maria lit a small fire inside her home, the warm glow reflecting in her tired but content eyes. She thought of John, the calm stranger who had appeared when she needed him most, and felt a quiet gratitude. The lesson he had taught her, that strength could include trust, patience, and cooperation, would stay with her forever. She sat quietly, sipping a warm drink, listening to the soft sounds of her herd settling in for the night. The calves were curled in the hay, the cows resting nearby, and all was calm. Maria smiled faintly, feeling a sense of peace she had not known in a long time. The storm had passed, but the lessons it brought, courage, trust, patience, and shared effort, would guide her every day forward. For the first time in years, Maria felt truly ready for the future. Her herd was safe, her land secure, and her heart lighter. She knew there would be storms again, both literal and metaphorical, but she also knew she had the strength, knowledge, and resilience to face them. She would continue her work, care for her animals, and build a life that honored the lessons of the past and the hope of tomorrow. And as she looked out at her herd, nestled safely in their improved pens, she whispered softly to herself, a quiet affirmation. We made it. We'll be okay. And we'll keep going. Together.